What grade does the Carolina Panthers 2025 draft haul deserve? Well, I'll tell you right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show right here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where on Friday, I'm back once again answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions here on the show. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council or at me over on Blue Sky, also at Julian Council, to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. This episode, Locked On Panthers, brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Draft grades, let's do them yet again. And if we're being honest about draft grades coming immediately after a draft, it's probably not the wisest thing to do, considering, well, none of these players have played a game yet, and we need to see, even after this upcoming season, how the next couple of years play out, which is why on this show, the last couple of off seasons, I've gone back and looked at draft classes from 3 years ago, because I'm of the belief that you need to see how they play out across their first 3 seasons heading in to the final year of their rookie deals, as these deals are 4 years. If you are a first round pick, you have the 5th-year option, but they're 4-year contracts. And after 3 seasons, we kind of know who they've been and what they're going to be for the most part for the Panthers and wherever these players end up. So we do it every year. We do the draft grades after the draft, and they're fairly pointless, but hey, I do a daily podcast, so I have no room to scoff at any topic that can get me through the day. And I know that y'all want to know my opinions on this draft class. I'm going to give you my grades on each pick and then the class overall here on today's show. Starting off, of course, with the 8th overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. That was Tetairoa McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, which was a shock to me, and I think to a lot of y'all on Thursday evening, as everything that we had been led to believe, and that's probably what the Panthers wanted every team in the league to believe, was that Carolina at 8 was going to stick to defense and continue to focus on that side of the ball. If you look at last year, as Panthers offense needed to be overhauled, the offensive line, the receiver room, they continued that trend with the first pick that they had in the draft, trading up from 33 all the way up to 32 there in the first round the day before, and taking Xavier Legette, the wide receiver from South Carolina. So even though the Panthers had traded for Deontay Johnson, the fact that they had brought in all these players on the offensive line, they were still focused on the offense with their first pick in the 2024 NFL draft. And looking at it this year, they brought in some players on the defensive end, at edge rusher, or interior rather, defensive interior, at edge rusher, at safety, linebacker, all across the defense. They spent a ton of money during free agency to make that better. And I thought that they would continue that trend by taking an edge rusher. Instead, they looked at their board. They saw Tetairoa McMillan as the top player rated on their board. And they said, no, we're good. We don't need Jalen Walker. We don't need Michael Williams. We don't need any of these other defensive guys, because we are going to stick to our board, and we are going to take arguably the best wide receiver in the draft. And if you look at the last couple of years in college football, there have been very few receivers that have put up the numbers or have been better than Tetairoa McMillan. You got the last year's draft class. Guys like Malik Neighbors were outstanding during his career at LSU. The same thing when it looks at Rome Odunze at Washington. You also got to look at, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. and what he was able to do at Ohio State. Tetairoa McMillan, you put his numbers the last 2 seasons in comparison to the final 2 years of all those players, he was right up there with them. And those were also top 10 picks from a year ago. And now a top 10 pick this year is Tet McMillan from Arizona. So they arguably get the best wide receiver in the draft at a 90.5 PFF grade since 2023, third amongst wide receivers coming out of college. So that's going in there and looking at Odunze, that's looking at Marvin Harrison Jr., that's looking at Malik Neighbors, looking at all those receivers that were taken last year in the first 34 picks. He was right up there with them, and Carolina was able to get him at 8th overall. 213 receptions, 3,423 yards, 26 touchdowns in 3 seasons at Arizona. 3 seasons, he put up those numbers. He needed 3 years of high-level production to show that, yeah, I'm worthy of a top 10 pick. Didn't need 4, didn't need 5, didn't need 6, 7 years. And a lot of these guys are getting now eligibility in college. He did in 3 seasons, showed he was a stud, and the Panthers took him, and he is an outstanding player. Now, there were, of course, some concerns about Tet McMillan. Doesn't have great speed. While he does have the size and the catch radius, there's going to be concerns about his ability to get open at the NFL level and in the contested catches. Will that translate to the NFL? Yes, but also going to be a lot harder to make that happen against the cornerback talent he's going to face at this level. And there was questions about whether he loved the game. And I know I put this video out there on Thursday. Again, just to let y'all know, I said in the comments a couple of days ago on YouTube, I was brought to attention that quote that he gave about not liking to watch film and all of that. I showed you the video to provide context. That came to my attention on Thursday evening. Kevin Ostreicher, the host of Locked On Ravens, was doing our NFL draft coverage. He asked me that. I had no idea what he was talking about. Did a quick Google search, found a Yahoo article that had the video, and I played it for you without understanding that apparently that's when he was a freshman. So obviously that's my bad. I wasn't trying to use that to say Tet McMillan is a bad player or not worth the pick. And to demonstrate that, I gave you Dave Canales' quote right afterwards, but I'm sure there's plenty of people who that won't matter to. I played it and they now don't trust me, and that's okay. I'm sorry. I'm just putting out that I made a mistake there. Should have looked closer. But looking at this pick overall, Dan Morgan said back in February at the Combine that they had obvious needs on the defensive side of the ball, but they were not going to neglect the offense. This is not neglecting the offense. This is investing in your third-year quarterback and Bryce Young, who comes off of 9 games where he looked really good in the season, and he's the surefire starter in 2025, and you're hoping to build off of what he was able to do in the second half of last season, and bringing in Tet McMillan that does that. And I have been someone who's constantly brought up the fact that they need more wide receiver help in that room. Well, I think Leggett can be good for them. And I like what Adam Thielen's done. And Jalen Coker was a nice addition last year. David Moore played well last year. That's just not a group that's really scaring anybody in the NFL. Adding Tet McMillan, that helps. That adds a different dimension. They also added Jimmy Horn Jr., we'll talk about later on. That adds another dimension. They got better with their wide receiver room when they drafted Tet McMillan 8th overall. But the most important thing to look at when discussing this pick is that they stay disciplined. The Panthers stuck to their board. They could have tried to reach and got someone below who they had rated there, but they saw Tet McMillan as their top-rated player. They couldn't get out of the pick, and they took him. So with that, it's hard to not give them anything other than an A. So I'm going to give them an A- for the Tet McMillan pick, 8th overall in a 2025 draft. Go to the next night on Friday evening. Carolina decides that they're going to swap a second, third, and fourth round pick with the Broncos and also move up from the 7th round to the 6th round to get the 51st overall pick. And that ended up becoming Nic Scourton, the edge rusher from Texas A&M. 17 sacks in his 3 collegiate seasons, 10 coming back in 2023 as a sophomore at Purdue. He transferred back home to Bryan, Texas to play for the Texas A&M Aggies last year. Only had 5 sacks after a 10-sack season, but 14 tackles for loss, and was named first team all SEC. So while the sack numbers went down, the TFLs were right there where they were the year prior, and he was still considered one of the best defensive players at that edge rusher spot in the Southeastern Conference, the best conference in college football a year ago. Look at PFF as well. They graded him at an 82.8 back in 2023. It only dropped to an 80.1 in 2024. 1 year, he's second team all Big Ten. The next year, he's first team all SEC with the sack totals not matching the sack total he had the year prior. So PFF, they can be a good outlet to look at when it comes to some of those numbers where the traditional sacks, or the traditional stats like sacks, those may not match up, but you look at the advanced numbers there, and he was pretty much the same player, but this past season, a first-team All-SEC selection. Looking at a scouting report from NFL.com saying he's an electric rusher with a mature rush plan and rarely shows opponents the same look on consecutive plays. He won't outrace or bulldoze tackles, but he utilizes tempo alterations in a bag full of moves and counters. Teams threw chips and double teams his way out of concern and respect. Scourton's size, demeanor, and rush talent give him a chance to become a productive three-down starter off the edge. And in this scheme that Ejiro Evero has, where they want to be able to set the edge and stop the run, you need to be able to be a three-down kind of guy. And whether Ejiro is going to be the DC moving forward past this season or not, Nic Scourton is somebody who is going to be a foundational piece, hopefully, on this defense at the edge rusher spot. So be able to get a first-team All-SEC edge rusher who produced at a high level as a sophomore in the Big Ten at Purdue, 51st overall. Yeah, that's an A grade for me. So A- for Tet McMillan, A grade for Nic Scourton, A's all around for the top two picks in the 2025 draft for the Panthers. What about the second pick they had there on day 2 and their first 2 picks on day 3? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on the Locked On Panthers. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Back here on Locked On Panthers, grading the 2025 Carolina Panthers draft class. Now looking at the second pick there on day 2 on Friday evening last week. The Panthers traded up earlier that night to get Nic Scourton. They decided, let's trade up again, swapping third-round picks and giving up the second of their 3 fifth-round picks to the New England Patriots for 77th overall, which they used to take Princely Umanmielen, the edge rusher from the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss. And you look at what Umanmielen did throughout his career. Spent his first 4 seasons at Florida, down there in Gainesville, where he was second team All-SEC in 2023, where he led the team with 11.5 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Used his COVID year to come back for one more season, but that season not in Gainesville. Instead, he was in Oxford, got the bad to go there to Ole Miss, play for Lane Kiffin, was first team All-SEC in 2024, tied for 10th in the FBS with 10.5 sacks, had a 91.1 PFF grade in 2024. So you got on day 2 first team All-SEC players at the edge rusher spot. Again, the SEC is the best conference in college football, and this is coming from an ACC guy. And as an ACC guy, I can't even sit here and try to thump my chest about how good the ACC is, because it's not. It's been kind of a disaster the last couple of years. Cal and Stanford are in the conference, which makes them even worse at football than they were already. But the SEC, that's where the talent is. That's where kids want to be, and that's what you saw with Umanmielen and Scourton both playing at a high level at those spots. Umanmielen for 5 years, Scourton for 1, but enough for both of them to prove that they were among the best defenders, the best edge rushers in that conference. And the Panthers got both of them on day 2. At 51 and at 77. Again, it's an A for Scourton. And you look at the scouting report also from NFL.com on Umanmielen. It says Umanmielen is a serious ground gainer with burst, stride, and bend to create a shallow edges leading directly into the quarterback's drop space. He's not instinctive and takes predictable pathways to the pocket, but he's simply hard to keep out of the pocket due to his attributes. He lacks play strength and aggression as a run defender. He will have trouble setting edges and might not be an early down option early in his career. Umanmielen is an ascending stand-up edge rusher who might be just scratching the surface of his already threatening rush talent. And here, for right now, if what you're telling me is Princely Umanmielen is someone you need to bring in on third downs and that's it, okay, cool. Because right now, the Panthers don't really have a lot of guys you can trust to get you to the quarter or to get to the quarterback on third down. Maybe DJ Williams, the guy you trust the most right now. I'm not so sure, but it's not Clowney. It's not Pat Jones. We have not seen play in the black and blue just yet. And I don't know if you can say it's Nic Scourton or McMillan, but if early on in his career, especially for a DC who focus is more on setting the edge than actually getting after the pass rusher when looking at talent at edge rusher, cool. I'll take that. Just get him on the field and let him just get after the passer, play meet me at the quarterback. That's what the Panthers needed. So they got not a first round, but they got a first team all SEC talent in McMillan, who may not be good at stopping the run, but he can be a good pass rusher. Then they got another guy, the round prior in Scourton, who can be a 3-down type of dude. I'm cool with that. And if that's who McMillan's going to be in his career, if he's going to be a pass rushing specialist, that pays. Look at Bryce Huff, who was down there, or Bryce Huff, right, who was in Philadelphia and then went to the Jets, or he was the Jets and went to the Eagles. Like, that's the kind of guy who is just a pass rush specialist, and he's made a lot of money doing that. There was questions about Hassan Reddick in his career, whether he could do both, and he made a lot of money by being an ace pass rusher. Let that be Princely McMillan in Carolina. I'm totally good with that. But because he's not great at stopping the run, I give that a B plus either way to get another first team all SEC pick player there in the third round. And on day 2, I'm good with that. In the fourth round, the first pick that they made was at 114. The Panthers took Trevor Etienne, the running back from Georgia. Looking at Etienne's career, 3 seasons he spent in college, 2 down in Gainesville at Florida, then 1 at Georgia. Still just like blows my mind that these guys are going from arch rivals to arch rivals in a transfer portal. Hey, but do your thing, get your money, find the best situation possible, yada, yada, yada. He rushed for 2,081 yards in his 3 seasons there at Georgia and at Florida, where he was always in a backfield sharing carries. It was Montrell Johnson when he was at Florida with Billy Napier. Last year, he was with Nate Frazier, the true freshman. He had Cass Jones back there, the Robinson brothers, just multiple dudes touching the football, and also was a little banged up. Missed 3 games with a rib injury. Also was suspended to start the season opener after he was arrested back in March of 2024 for a DUI, among some other things. The charges were dropped in July last summer, but he still received 12 months probation and a fine, and Kirby suspended him for that first game. So missed 4 games due to injury, and because of the DUI arrest out later on was dropped. So that's any kind of off-field concerns, you can point to that. But a guy other than that, doesn't seem like there's ever been really any issues, and we all make mistakes. Of course, call an Uber or a Lyft. There's really no excuse for that anymore, but fortunately, no one was hurt in that incident, and it was a learning moment for Trevor Etienne and somebody who's still extremely talented and who Carolina believes can help them down the road. Last year, in his lone season at UGA, 3rd team all SEC selection, led the team with 9 rushing touchdowns, started 10 games, rushing for 609 yards as well. Looking at scouting report, Etienne catches with sticky hands, evades tacklers in space, and has a very good understanding of protections. He has middle round value, but could become a 3rd down option early in his career. And of course, he was selected in the middle round, in the 4th round at pick 1, the 14th overall. For me, I really like Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. And clearly the Panthers did not have Dylan Sampson as high on their board as they had Trevor Etienne. So it's hard for me to sit here after already giving them high marks for sticking to their board and taking Tetairoa McMillan, and then turning around and saying, I don't really love their evaluation that they had Etienne over Sampson. But I didn't really love their evaluation that they had Etienne over Sampson. He does bring good speed. Sampson's guys got speed too. And you look at NFL.com and Next Gen Stats as far as how they graded the prospects. They also had Dylan Sampson ahead of Trevor Etienne. But Etienne is somebody who, like that scouting report said, can come in and be that 3rd down back. I don't know if Carolina necessarily has one right now in Rico Dowdle and in Chuba Hubbard. You could say maybe Raheem Blackshear could be that, but now a younger Raheem Blackshear can also return kicks, and Raheem's a guy that we're going to talk about tomorrow as far as winners and losers from this draft class, as far as guys who are already on the roster and how they're going to be impacted by some of the selections that were made over the weekend. I do like Etienne. I don't necessarily love Etienne, but he's an average guy as far as looking at this. So I'm going to give it a C, which is an average grade. So I'm going to give that a C for Carolina, taking Trevor Etienne, 114th overall in the draft. Looking at the next pick there, they made in the 5th round. We were all talking about when would they get a safety, and it looked like it was going to have to be in the first round, or in the fifth round, rather, after they decided, let's go ahead and get a running back in the fourth round. And they ended up taking Lathan Ransom, the safety from the Ohio State University. Look at him last year, third team Associated Press, All-American, first team, all Big Ten, tied for the team lead with 3 forced fumbles, played in all 15 games on the way to being a national champion, 76 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, a sack, interception. Scouting report on Ransom: he's a disruptive physical safety who can positively impact games as a future starting potential as a middle rounder. I think the question when it comes to Lathan Ransom, and just for Carolina in general, when looking at that safety spot, is how does he fit in immediately? Does he come in and is he already a starter along with Trevon Merrick and Demai Richardson? Is that your threesome? I would think that they'd probably want to bring in another veteran safety to actually come and start next to Merrick, and then figure out how you're going to rotate Ransom and Richardson. But to hear about the physicality, the fact that he's coming from the program, he's coming from an Ohio State, and his ability to play a long season, it's 15 games. Like, that's very close to what you're playing in the NFL. So he's already shown the ability to be able to do that. I like the pick. I think it's, as far as like when looking at safety for Carolina, they may have waited too long. I know in my mock draft, I didn't have him taking a safety into the fourth round. They waited until the fifth round to do so. I would have loved to have seen it happen earlier, but they stuck to their board. They went with their guy. I give this a C+, because I don't know if Ransom's coming in right away and starting for them, and just kind of the delay in getting a safety is what brings me to that grade, other than having something a little bit higher. So those are my grades on Lathan Ransom, Trevor Etienne, and on Princely McMillan. 3 more picks left: Cam Jackson, Mitchell Evans, and Jimmy Horn. How do I feel about them? I'll tell you in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. The NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action right now. When you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the big game tips off, you can even combine live props bets into a same game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. 3 more selections, 3 more grades to give out, and then 1 overall grade to give out on the 2025 draft class for your Carolina Panthers. Looking over in the 5th round, pick 140, the Panthers decided to go ahead and to add to the interior a defensive line and get Cam Jackson, a defensive tackle from Florida. Looking at his scouting report, as honestly do not know a ton about Cam Jackson. His scouting report says massive nose tackle whose lack of productivity belies his potential to imprint on NFL games as a run defender. Jackson is a complete non-factor as a rusher. He's long and plays with extremely heavy hands and an ability to overwhelm single blockers at times. Jackson has freakish size and is a more enticing prospect when tape flashes are prioritized in the evaluation process. And looking at NFL Next Gen stats, they had him graded as a below average prospect based on historical metrics, but it's never a bad thing to invest on the defensive line, especially the interior. And you look at what Carolina's done this offseason, you get back Derek Brown, they're going to look at that as a free agency addition, even though we know he's already under contract, was going to be back in Carolina regardless, but still, he's back. They bring in Bobby Brown III, they bring in Turk Wharton. You have Shai Tuttle in a backup role. You have Ashawn Robinson coming back. You have Jaden Crumedy, who you drafted in the 6th round from a year ago. Now you put in Cam Jackson. There's going to be guys really battling. Like, Shai Tuttle may have taken a pay cut. I would think he'd still probably be safely on the roster because he's a vet. But a guy like Cam Jackson to come in here, I'm going to try and push him as he's going to be more of a run defender. And if you're talking about, you got Cam Jackson in there, Bobby Brown in there, you got Derek Brown trying to stop the run, I feel pretty excited about what that could be for Carolina moving forward down the line. So he's somebody you bring in, you have him as a run stopper. That's really all you're asking him to do at this point in time. Maybe he can develop into more of that as his career progresses. So I look at this as he's an average player. Next Gen stats had him as a below average prospect just based off of his grading, his metrics. So I'll give it a C. And we'll see how it goes. 5th round, 163. The Panthers went out there and they took Mitchell Evans, the tight end from Notre Dame. Evans had 72 receptions, 843 yards, 4 touchdowns combined his final 2 seasons at Notre Dame. Was a leading receiver on the team for the Irish back in 2023 before tearing his ACL, then led them again in receptions in 2024 on the way to a national title game. He had to kind of recover at the beginning of the last season from that ACL, was brought along slowly, and still found a way to lead Notre Dame in receptions. Now, in 2023, when that was the case, it was because the receivers in Notre Dame were terrible. Last year, much better. They got Bo Collins from Clemson to transfer over. Jaden Greathouse really broke out late in that season, especially in the playoffs. So more guys that they had to throw to, but still Mitchell Evans went out there and he continued the long line of receiving tight ends from Notre Dame that now are draft picks and I think could be impact players in the NFL. Now, looking at a scouting report, Evans' size and dual capacity ability on all three downs gives him a chance to become a starter of average catch production. And I like that. If we're talking about down the road, Tommy Tremble is no longer in Carolina, and it's Mitchell Evans and it's JT Sanders, two guys who were productive as pass catching tight ends on either side. When we're looking just at whatever personnel they're running with those two tight ends, I feel good about that. I'm always going to be a fan of Notre Dame pass catching tight ends, fan of Tommy Tremble, but still more a fan of the guys who catch passes at the college level, as it's pretty difficult to not be one of those in college and come to the NFL and then to turn into that, which I don't think it's fair expectations for guys out there. Still think Tommy Tremble is a good player, has played his role, is valuable for Carolina. Mitchell Evans is going to bring a different dynamic that Tremble didn't necessarily bring from his time in South Bend. So I do like this pick. They've been on the national runner-ups who be able to give what he's given the last couple of years at Notre Dame and the pedigree. I like this. I'm giving it a B plus. Mitchell Evans, a tight end from Notre Dame, going to Carolina, 163rd overall there in the 5th round. Then the final pick coming there on day 3 in the 6th round. This is part of the trade with Denver. That got Carolina up from the 7th round to the 6th round. They took Jimmy Horn, the wide receiver from Colorado. Horn spent his first 2 seasons in college at South Florida, then transferred to Colorado, spent the last 2 years there playing with Dion and, of course, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. 46 receptions, 19, more than 46 receptions, but he had 1,967 yards and 11 touchdowns during his collegiate career. Probably 146 receptions. That's probably what it was. I missed out whatever number I needed. He can also return kicks as well. He adds an element of a returner, also that speed that they need in the slot, which I really like. And the fact that he's coming from an NFL scheme, which is what Pat Shurmur was running in Colorado the last year and a half when he was a play caller. I say year and a half because that first season he was there, he took over in the middle of the season for the former OC, who's now the head coach at San Diego State, whose name escapes me at this point in time on the show. But Jimmy Horn coming from an NFL scheme, that should probably help him be able to translate over quickly as far as just learning the playbook and learning the verbiage and all of that. Looking at the scouting report, says Horn is small but competitive and has the speed to make teams pay attention. The target rate and production dipped in 2024, but the hands and catch consistency were vastly improved from 2023. He needs to prove he can uncover against a more athletic and physical brand of coverage in the league. Horn catches in traffic without hesitation as the wiggle and gas hit a big play once it hits his hands. The size and durability will concern teams, but he's fast and fearless, which will appeal to squads looking to stretch the field from the slot. And I think Carolina is one of those teams looking to stretch the field from the slot and looking for a guy who can have that wiggle in the gas to break a big one. Right now, the last 2 years, we haven't really seen it. We've seen a blown coverage by Dallas that led to Coker with a long catch and run. But other than that, haven't really seen a ton of yak for the Panthers, whether it was last year in 24 and the year prior in the disastrous 2023 season. That is an element that has been missing. And until they get that element, I think that's really going to hinder how good this offense can be and how good the Panthers can be overall, because you need to be able to have explosive offense, have those explosive plays in football today in order to really win at a high level. We see that from all those teams atop the NFL. Carolina has not been able to do that. But adding Jimmy Horn Jr. potentially could give them the ability to do that down the line. I like this pick. I like him. I love adding another wide receiver. I give that a B. So my overall grade, though, for the 2025 draft class for the Panthers, they successfully brought in a wide receiver who elevates the receiver room when you look at Tetairoa McMillan, a guy who could potentially be that wide receiver 1 down the line. I did not feel like that was Xavier Legette. And if it now is going to be Tetairoa McMillan, who gets drafted 8th overall, that's a big difference from 8th to 32, and really a guy who's going to go 33rd. So it's a huge difference when you look at what the caliber player who goes in the top 10. Think Marvin Harrison Jr., think Malik Neighbors, think Rome Odunze, to what you're expecting to get a guy who goes at the back end, the very last pick of the first round. So expectations should be different for Tetairoa McMillan than they should be for Xavier Legette moving forward. The expectation for Xavier Legette should be that he's going to be your number 2. the expectation for Tet McMillan is that he's going to be wide receiver 1, which I actually think is a good thing for Xavier, that he's not going to have, I don't know the weight of the world, but he's not going to have the high expectations that people had for him a year ago when I never really felt like he was truly going to be a number 1 receiver. Now he can settle into that wide receiver 2 role moving forward, while Tet McMillan, the pressure, the expectations are all on him to be that wide receiver 1. And that could be really good moving forward if those two guys both pan out. But they added a guy who could be that wide receiver 1, fill a role where I've been saying Carolina needs to find that player, and they may have found it in Tet McMillan. And then you also add Jimmy Horn. Those guys, plus Mitchell Evans, add pass catchers for your quarterback, Bryce Young, and they can all be factors down the road. I love the additions, especially on day 2 of 2 edge rushers who are all SEC performers this past year in Princely Umanmielen, also Nic Scourton. This was a deep class, and while it may have been frustrating or a little nervy to not get somebody there at 8th overall, get one of the top edge rushers, did you need to do it with this kind of class when you could wait until the 2nd round and the 3rd round? Of course, they were aggressive and traded up, but you could still wait until day 2 to get 2 first-team All-SEC guys that produce at a high level and put out some pretty outstanding PFF grades. Again, Umanmielen, 91.1, elite grade last year in his final year in college football. Scourton, a 3-and-done kind of guy. I love what they did there by getting those 2 guys. And despite the fact that they passed on someone in the 1st round, it's totally fine. They stuck to their board, and they went out there and they got some guys who have high upside. They still have holes at safety, I think. Lathan Ransom, we'll see. Lathan Ransom, we'll see what he's able to do for Carolina this year and when he can factor in as a starter of age. Day 1, maybe it's not. It's nice that they're able to add. Of course, I mentioned Jimmy Horn. It's good to add depth there with Cam Jackson at defensive tackle. But I still think there's questions as far as depth goes at corner and at linebacker. And corner kind of just comes down to how do you view Shamar Bartholomew and Caleb Evans. And in linebacker, you got 3 guys, but not really anything behind them. So depth is still a concern. Whether they have a true starting safety to go next to Trevon Merrick, still a concern. But overall, I do think they accomplished what they needed to accomplish. That was building some depth at certain spots and building towards the future with this draft class. So overall, I look at this as a B-plus draft class for Carolina. What will it be in 3 years' time if I'm still doing this podcast? And I will let you know what my grade is 3 years from now when we actually see how things play out for these guys. But overall, for me, it's a B+ for Dan Morgan, Dave Canales, and Brant Cantillis as far as their 2024 draft haul goes here on Locked On Panthers. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show for free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because I'm back again on Friday answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions at me or DM me on Twitter at me on Blue Sky to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all on Wednesday, where we'll be talking about the winners and the losers from the 2025 draft for Carolina, which guys may have lost their jobs because of who the Panthers drafted this weekend. We'll talk about it here on Wednesday on Locked On Panthers.